Okay, the survivors testify. So, Section 135 is the announcement of the murder of Joseph Smith and his brother Hyrum Smith in Carthage jail. That is a section that is not technically a part of the Joseph Smith papers because it happened after his death and it wasn't like owned by him or anything. However, what I have is the journal of Willard Richards and a statement written from John Taylor. And so instead of footnotes, instead of papers, introductions, and circumstances, I will just be reading these accounts. If you'd like to follow along in Section 135, feel free. But these documents are kind of meant to fill in all that history. It'll give the background. It'll give the footnotes. All of that will just be here. So out of respect for Willard Richards and President Taylor, as well as out of respect for two people who got shot in a jail, I felt that this was the best way to go. So here we go. Willard Richards, we will begin with him. He gives a full account of riding to Carthage, people as they spake to him along the way. There's a lot of detail about, kind of comings and goings. And we get down to the day that the jail was attacked. So I will read thusly. 3:15 p.m. The guard have been more severe in their operations, threatening among themselves or telling what they would do when the war was over. One would sell his farm and move out of the state if Smith stayed. Taylor sung, poor wayfaring man of grief. Hyrum read from Josephus. Interesting. 4:00, changed guard. 4:15. Joseph commenced conversing with the guard about Joseph H. Jackson law, etc., and Hyrum and Dr. Richards conversed sometime till 5:15, 5:20. George Stilgall returned from town and said Markham was surrounded by a mob and had gone to Nauvoo and suggested that they would be safer in the jail. Joseph said after supper, "We will go in." Stilgall went out. And Joseph said to Dr. Richards, "If we go in the jail, will you go in with us?" Doctor answered, "Brother Joseph, you did not ask me to cross the river with you. You did not ask me to come to Carthage. You did not ask me to come to jail with you. And do you think I would forsake you now? But I will tell you what I will do. If you are condemned to be hung for treason, I will be hung in your place stead, and you shall go free. Joseph, you cannot." Doctor said, "I will." In a few minutes before 6:00, the jailer had come in his boy came in to bring some water. So just to make that part very clear, Willard Richard says, "Look, you've never asked me to stay. I'm not going to leave you now. And if they want to hang you, please let me hang in your stead so that you can go free." Pretty powerful moment from Dr. Richards, from Willard Richards. Over the page. The guard wanted some wine. Joseph gave Dr. Richards $2.50 to give the guard, but the guard said one was enough and would take no more. The guard immediately sent for a bottle of wine, pipe, and 2 small papers of tobacco. And one brought them in soon after the jailer went out. Doctor topped the bottle, presented a glass to them, Joseph. He tasted, Brother Taylor tasted. The doctor tasted, gave the bottle to the guard, who turned to go out. When at the stairs top, someone below called him 2 or 3 times. He went down, a little rustling at the door. The cry "surrender" and "discharge 3 or 4 arm" followed instantly. Doctor glanced an eye by the curtain. Say saw 100 armed men around the door. Joseph, Hyrum, and Taylor's coat were off. Joseph sprang to his coat for his 6-shooter. Hyrum for his single barrel, Taylor for Markham's club cane, and Doctor for Taylor's cane. All sprang against the door. Joseph, Tyler, and Richard sprang to the left. Hyrum back in front of the door and snapped his pistol. When a ball struck him in the left side of his nose, fell back on floor saying, "I am a dead man." Joseph discharged his 6-shooter in the entry, reaching around the door casing. Continual discharges came in the room. 6-shooter misfired 2 or 3 times. Taylor sprang to leap from the east window, was shot in the window. That is the end. And the rest of the story that he wrote is actually published in the Nauvoo Neighbor and is not written in this journal. So that's the end of it. So basically, Taylor sprang up and tried to escape out of the window, and he actually gets shot while he's in the window. So for the rest of the story, we go to John Taylor, who was also in the room. So that was Willard Richards. He was in the room, and more or less, as you saw, like, people are firing back and forth. Hyrum Smith is shot to the left of his nose and his face and is killed. And so let's hear it from John Taylor. He also shares some additional details, mainly telling the story of how the Saints kind of got to this point, and why they're in prison and the lack of help from legal sides and all of this stuff. And so there's a lot more of like the history of the Saints leading up to this point. I'm going to skip that. And then we get this. Sometime after dinner, we sent for some wine. It has been reported by some that this was taken as a sacrament. It was no such thing. Our spirits were generally dull and heavy, and it was for to revive us. I think it was Captain Dan Jones who went after it, but they would not suffer him to return. I believe we all drank of the wine and gave some to one or two of the prison guards. We, all of us, felt unusually dull and languid with a remarkable depression of spirits. In consequence with those feelings, I sang a song that had lately been introduced into Nauvoo, entitled, A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief. The song is pathetic, and the tune quite plaintive, and was very much in accordance with our feeling at the time. Our spirits were all depressed, dull and gloomy, and surcharged with indefinite ominous forebodings. After a lapse of some time, Brother Hyrum requested me again to sing that song. I replied, Brother Hyrum, I do not feel like singing. Over the page. When he remarked, oh, never mind, commence singing and you will get the spirit of it. At his request, I did so. Soon afterwards, I was sitting at one of the front windows of the jail when I saw a number of men with painted faces coming around the corner of the jail and aiming toward the stairs. The other brethren had seen the same, for as I went to the door, I found Brother Hyrum Smith and Dr. Richards already leaning against the door. They both pressed against it with their shoulders to prevent it being opened, as the lock and latch were comparatively useless. While in this position, the mob, who had come upstairs and strove to open the door, probably thought it was locked and fired a ball through the keyhole. At this, Dr. Richards and Brother Hyrum leapt back from the door. Brother Hyrum standing right opposite to the door with his face towards it, almost instantly another ball passed through the panel of the door and struck Brother Hyrum on the left side of the nose and entering his face and head. Simultaneously, at the same instant, another ball from outside entered his back, passing through his body and striking his watch. The ball came from the back through the jail opposite the door and must, from its range, have been fired from by the Carthage Greys, as the something of firearms shot close by the jail would have entered the ceiling. We being in the second story, there never was a time after that Hyrum would have received the later wound. Immediately when the ball struck him, he fell on his back, crying as he fell, I am a dead man. He never recovered, moved afterwards. Over the page. I shall never forget the feeling of deep sympathy and regard manifested in the countenance of Brother Joseph as he drew nigh to Hyrum and leaning over him exclaimed, Oh, my poor dear Brother Hyrum. He, however, instantly arose, and with a firm, quick step and a determined expression of countenance approached the door, and pulling the six-shooter left by Brother Wheelock from his pocket, opened the door slightly and fired, snapped the pistol 6 successive times. Only 3 of the barrels, however, discharged. I afterwards understood that 2 of those were wounded by these discharges, 2 of whom I am informed died. I had in my hands a large, strong hickory stick, brought there by Brother Markman and left by him, and which I had seized as soon as I saw the mob approach. And while Brother Joseph was firing the pistol, I stood close behind him. As soon as he had discharged it, he stepped back, and I immediately took his place next the door, whilst he occupied the one I had done while he was shooting. Dr. Richards at this time had a knotty walking stick in his hands belonging to me and stood next to Brother Joseph a little further from the door in an oblique direction, apparently to avoid the rake of the fire from the door. The firing of Brother Joseph made our assailants pause for a moment. Very soon after, however, they pushed the door some distance open and protruded and discharged their guns into the room, when I parried them off with my stick, giving another direction to the balls. It certainly was a terrible scene. Next page. Streams of fire as thick as my arm passed by me as these men fired, and unarmed as we were, it looked like certain death. I remember feeling as though my time had come, but I do not know when, in any critical position, I was more calm, unruffled, and energetic, and acted with more promptness and decision. I certainly was far from pleasant to be so near the muzzles of those firearms as they belched forth their liquid flame and deadly balls. While I was engaged in parrying the guns, Brother Joseph said, "That's right, Brother Taylor, parry them off as well as you can." These were the last words I ever heard him speak on earth. Every moment the crowd at the door became more dense, as they were unquestionably pressed on by those in the rear, ascending the stairs until the whole entrance at the door was literally crowded with muskets and rifles, whilst with swearing, shouting, and demoniacal expressions of those outside the door and on the stairs, the firing of guns mingled with their horrid oaths and extrications made it look like pandemonium let loose, and was indeed a fit representation of the horrid deed in which they were engaged. After parrying the guns for some time, which now protruded thicker and further into the room, and seeing no hope of escape or protection there, as we were now surrounded unarmed, it occurred to me that we might have some friends outside. Next page. There might then be some chance of escape, but there seemed to be none, as I expected them every moment to rush into the room, and nothing but extreme cowardice that kept them out, as the tumult and pressure increased without any other hope. I made a spring for the window, which was right in front of the jail door, where the mob was standing, and also exposed to the fire of the Carthage Greys, who were stationed some 10 or 12 rods off. The weather was hot, and we all of us had our coats off, and the window was raised to admit air. As I reached the window, it was on the point of leaping out. I was struck by a ball from the door, about midway of my thigh, which struck the bone and flattened out almost to the size of a $quarter, and then passed on through the fleshy part to within about half an inch. I think some prominent nerve must have been struck, severed, or injured, for as soon as the ball struck me, I fell like a bird when shot, or an ox struck by a butcher, and lost entirely and instantaneously all power to move, of action, or locomotion. I fell onto the window and sill and cried out, "I am shot." Not possessing any power to move, I felt myself falling outside of the window, but immediately I felt inside from to me at that time an unknown cause. When I struck the floor, my animation seemed restored, as I have sometimes seen squirrels and birds after being shot. As soon as I felt the powers of motion, I crawled under the bed, which was in the corner of the room. Next page. Not far from the window, when I received my wound while on my way under the bed, I was wounded in 3 other places. One ball entered a little below the left knee and never was extracted. Another entered into the forepart of my left arm a little above the wrist, and passing down by the joint, it lodged in the fleshy part of my hand, about midway in my hand, and a little above the upper joint of my little finger. Another struck me on the fleshy part of the left hip, and tore away the flesh as large as my hand, dashing the mangled fragments of flesh and blood against the wall. My wounds were painful, and the sensation produced was as though a ball had passed through and down the whole length of my leg. It would seem that immediately after my attempt to leap out the window, Joseph also did the same thing, of which circumstance I have no knowledge, only from information. The first thing that I noticed was a cry that he had leapt out of the window. A cessation of firing followed. The mob rushed downstairs. Dr. Richards went to the window. Immediately afterwards, I saw the doctor going toward the jail door, And as there was an iron door at the head of the stairs adjoining our door, which led to the cells for criminals, it struck me that the doctor was going in there. And I said to him, "Stop, doctor, and take me." Next page. Take me along. He proceeded to the door and opened it, and then returned and dragged me along to a small cell prepared for criminals. Brother Richards was very much troubled and exclaimed, "Oh, Brother Taylor, is it possible that they have killed both Brother Hyrum and Joseph? It cannot surely be, and yet I saw them shoot him." And elevating his hands 2 or 3 times, he exclaimed, "O Lord my God, spare thy servants." He then said, "Brother Taylor, this is a terrible event." And he dragged me further into the cell, saying, "I am sorry I cannot do better for you." And taking an old, filthy mattress, he covered me with it, saying, and said, "That may hide you, and you may yet live to tell the tale, but I expect they will kill me in a few moments." While laying in this position, I suffered the most excruciating pain. Soon afterwards, Brother Richards came to me, informing me that the mob had precipitously fled, and at the same time confirming my worst fears, that Joseph was assuredly dead. I felt a dull, lonely, sickening sensation at the news. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the rest of the story. The announcement was, one thing I will just kind of officially point out is that both of them, as the section says, received 4 balls. So the idea is that Joseph was probably shot in the window, and there's a good chance that when he fell that they kept shooting him, even though they knew he was dead. I think they had the intention of mutilating his body. But as I recall, I believe Joseph's other brother, um, rode in, and since the mob was a little scared of what they were doing, they thought it was a whole collection of Mormons, and that they fled. And I am going to say fled like cowards. They came to shoot these 2. They were more or less unarmed. I don't believe anybody was actually shot and killed by Joseph Smith. I think that was confirmed as not true, but again, it's got a hearsay looking at the papers. But that is how Joseph Smith died. And in a previous episode, I did go through a little bit more of the detail just from my perspective. But I felt since this was a papers project, since I'm trying to be respectful of the history, I just wanted to share with you 2 accounts written by the people who are actually in the room. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the life of Joseph Smith and the Joseph Smith Papers. And my intention for this was to use the Joseph Smith Papers to fill in the history behind the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I hope this has been enjoyable. I hope it's been informative. It has been, quite frankly, very difficult to pull these off every week and to research this with all the other things that life has in store. Because of that, I didn't really get a chance. I didn't have the time to really market this in a way, so it wasn't necessarily popular while we were doing it. But I will say at this point, I thank you. This is the end of the Joseph Smith Papers project. This is the end of filling in the history. I may or may not do another episode, but I think for now this will be it. I do intend in the future to create shorts and things from the things that have already been created. But as far as new episodes or new explorations of the Joseph Smith Papers, those days are over. And so I thank you for this. And I hope that you have enjoyed filling in the history. I am the amateur historian saying thank you so much for quite an experience. And if you get a chance, please record your life, because your life is worth remembering. I think that's the main thing that I have learned from these papers. Your life is worth remembering, whether you're a big, huge deal or not. So enjoy, and thank you for enjoying filling in the history.